All right, let's get started, everyone. I know that there is one question online that I need to address. It's about sharpening. And the questions that are directly germane to the class, I will absolutely answer as fast as I can. Questions that are less germane to the class, like about sharpening, I will answer when I can answer them. I'll try to answer them as quickly as I can. I know that one's there, and I'll see if I can't get it done tonight. All right, so hopefully you had a chance to go out into the shop and mill up your stock. Tonight we'll be talking about the case joinery, and that's dovetails for the corners, and then dados with tongues, and that's how the dividers in the shelf go in. And we should be able to get through all of it. I hope tonight to be able to maybe not glue the case together, but at least put it together for you. If we don't get all of that done tonight, then we'll pick up there next time a little bit. But I hope to get it all done tonight. So we should just jump right in. And all of my parts have been sitting in plastic since last week. And they are still dead flat and ready to go. So here's the order of operations for all of this. What we need to do is we have to cut dovetails, and we also need to cut some dados. The dovetails you can cut any number of ways. You can cut them all with hand tools. You can cut them with a lead dovetail jig if you wanted to. I'm going to cut them tonight, the pins in the tails at the table saw, primarily because that's really fast, and even though it's roughly 2 hours, we still need to work quickly. But also because it'll allow me to focus on what's really important with dovetails. And that's not actually the tools that you use to cut them with. What's really important is your layout and then transferring the tails to the pin board and then cutting the pins accurately. And the tool that you use for that is really not important. But I will show you a complete technique on the table saw, and I know that not everyone's going to want to do it. So if you want to do it some other way, that's fine. But there's still a lot that you can take away from tonight in terms of tips for layout and transferring your tails accurately, and also general information about things like laying out with a pencil versus laying out with a marking knife. All right, so we're going to do dovetails. Then we have some dados, and I'm going to do the dados at my router table because they're small and they're stopped dados, and you can't cut stopped dados all that safely at the table saw. So we're going to do them at the router table. Now the order of operations for tonight, and I'll sort of explain everything initially, and then as we're going along, feel free to ask questions as I work. So here's the order of operations tonight. I've just cut all my parts to their final dimensions. They're as thick as they need to be. They're the final length and the final width. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is to hand plumb. Why I'm doing that is because I don't want to say, if I cut the dados, and these dados are pretty shallow, they're going to be just over 1/8 of an inch deep. If I cut them and then hand plane the surface and maybe sand the surface, I'm removing depth from the dado, and that affects how well the dividers are able to join the cabinet. But also with dovetails, and it's a little more critical with dovetails, especially the pin board. If you cut your dovetails and fit them, and then go back and do surface prep on the inside of the pin board, you're going to make the dovetails fit a little less tightly, because you're removing material from the widest part of the pin, and that means the board is going to drop down a little bit more into the sockets between the tails, and it's going to fit a little less tightly. I like to do all that surface prep first. So I'm going to go to my bench, do that surface prep. Then I'm going to lay out the shoulders for my dovetails. Then I will use that as a means to lay out the location of the dados, cut the dados, then cut my dovetails. All right. And after that, I should be able to bring the case together, and then it will be time to fit the dividers in the shelf. All right. And I hope that we get, at least one of the, either the shelf or one of the dividers done. They're all done the same way. So if we do one, it'll show you how to do all three. So all of that being said, it's time to head over to the bench and do a little bit of hand planing. If you have questions, just use the chat feature to ask them, and I will answer them as I'm able to, concentration and time permitting. Joe will look for questions and read them out to me. All right, so I'm going to head over there now and just take my 4 case pieces. So the first thing that you have to do before you can prepare the surface on the inside face of all of these parts is to decide what the inside and the outside is, okay? And for me, that's just an aesthetic choice. And really the top and the bottom probably do not matter that much because this is something hanging on the wall and you don't really see them. So you don't have to be too particular there, but with the case sides, you do want to be particular. I'm going to have that being outside. Whew, there's a lot of pitch marks on this particular piece of cherry. I kind of like pitch marks. It's the darker stuff that you see here, and but this I think is too much. Can I see that? Okay, you think?
I think so. Looks good to me.
So there's pitch here and all this. That's probably too much to be on the outside, in my opinion. So I'm going to make that the inside of my board, and then you have to know which direction to plane in. You always want to hand plane, and there's no grain. I mean, I can't really show you this. It's just the grain's not pronounced enough for it to ever be visible on camera. But you want to plane up the hill with a hand plane. So you'll start where the grain on the low end and work towards the high end. All right, so I'm going to do that now. And this should not take me but maybe a minute or two. The cherry's a little bit figured, and actually the stuff that I did the rip and flip with is super figured. So I'm using my 4.5 smoother, which has a 50-degree frog. It's at a higher angle, and that cuts down on tear out. And also, so that I'd be super impressive, I sharpened it today. So I look good. All right. The first couple of passes, you're definitely going to skip and hit the high spots. It's really funny how, the planer, you think the planer is going to give you this perfectly uniform surface, and it just doesn't. So you can see that, will be really hard to see, but for me, the spots where I'm actually hand planing are instantly sort of burnished and much more reflective than the spots that still have the planer surface on them. So you can keep an eye on that reflectivity or the chatoyance, and that sort of tells you when you have planed enough to stop. You want to work in uniform strokes across the width. The one negative about a higher angle frog is that it's harder to push. And this is a 2.5 inch wide blade, which makes it even more difficult to push. And so it's always a workout using this fella.
2 questions for you.
Yep.
Do we need to be concerned with pitch marks when finishing? That's from Andrew.
No.
Okay, no. And then does Matt own the outside corners of his plane iron so it doesn't dig in?
I do camber my smoothing plane blades. Yes. And I can tell you when it comes to a hand plane, what's more important than, especially online on the internet, you'll see people talk about what their shavings are like. And the shavings are totally irrelevant because the shavings don't end up in the completed piece of furniture. What's important is the surface that your plane leaves behind. A truly sharp plane that really has no the cutting edge is not jagged is going to leave a really smooth, like glass-like surface. You won't be able to feel any defects. And that's what's important. Now, if you need to minimize tear out, one, you want to be sharp. 2, you want to take a light shaving. All right. That's 2 down.
What is the effective angle of the blade?
Well, the closer the blade angle is to 90 degrees, the more it acts like a card scraper as opposed to a chisel as it's cutting the material, and the less tear out it creates. That's why when people have really difficult woods, they'll go to a card scraper to clean up the surface without getting tear out. I doubt the difference between, well, let's see.
You can hold it up to the camera.
Can you see it from the camera above?
If you tilt them towards the camera, it might work a little better.
Like this? Or which camera?
Yeah, the wide angle.
This one.
Yeah. There you go.
Can you see the difference between those two? I don't know. Joe?
Yeah, I can see it on here. Yeah,
Okay.
we're getting thumbs up.
Yeah, so this one's been hand planed and this one hasn't. And it's a really nice, I don't know if the chatoyance is showing up.
Definitely.
It's really nice.
Yeah, you can see it.
I'm not worried about the final thickness or the thickness of these parts right now because in the end, after I cut my dovetails and glue the case together and clean up the outside, they're all going to be the correct thickness.
The overhead shot is awesome.
All right, but for those of you who do like your shavings, there you go. Those are nice shavings. In terms of shavings, it's pretty good. It's better than beard clippings. All right, so go back to this one.
Sure.
All right, so I've inside surface is fine. There are a few little tracks, but what I'll do is go back and I'll knock those down with some 400 or 3 grit paper, and it'll be fine. that won't really affect the fit of the joinery. So next thing to do is to lay out the shoulders of my dovetails with a marking gauge. I like marking gauges that have knives in them. They cut really cleanly across the, we can go tight here or tight over there.
Either way, whatever we want to do.
Yeah. So this is just a little marking gauge that I made because you don't need a giant, I don't want a giant marking gauge for a lot of the smaller stuff that I make. And it just has a knife in it. It's a knife I made probably from a jigsaw blade. All right, so I'm going to use this. Now I'm going to set it to be just slightly less than the thickness of my boards. And I mean, like not even a 64th. It's just a tiny little bit under. Lock it down. All right. Now we're going to lay out the shoulders on all of these.
Go to the overhead.
Okay.
Right where you're at is perfect.
Right here is good? All right, let me...
Move that.
Yeah. I don't want that to fall. That would be an expensive mistake.
There you go.
All right, so now I'm going to lay out these shoulders. Now, I'm doing the tails. On a wall cabinet, the general practice is to put the tails on the case sides and the pins on the top and bottom. And that, the idea, the way it was explained to me is, where am I talking to this?
You can go there.
Yeah, the way that was explained to me is that the gravity is pulling those joints tight, and so they won't come apart. Whereas if you put the pins or the tails on the top and the bottom, and then the pins just slide up in there, they could just pull out of the pin sockets in the tailboard. Do I really think that would ever happen? No, I don't. I mean, I guess if you didn't glue your joints together and then you loaded the case up with, like $3 billion worth of gold, that might pull it apart. But I really don't think it's, a small wall cabinet like this, it wouldn't be an issue. But the accepted practice is on a wall cabinet, and most casework in general, tails on the sides, pins on the top and bottom. On pin boards, you only mark the shoulder on the faces of the board. Did that show up? So I'm going to mark these two ends. No questions?
There was one question about the non-slip surface, the board placed while you're planing, but a couple people answered it was it's actually a stop for the planing.
That's not correct. It's actually magic.
It's magic.
Yeah.
Magic works too.
Now on a tailboard, if you are cutting them by hand, or say if you cut the tails with at the bandsaw, then you would also want to mark the front and back edge, because you're going to cut that away to create that socket for the half pin. The technique that I'm using to cut them, I actually don't need to worry about that, because that entire half socket is going to be cut by the table saw blade. So I'm not going to gauge on those front and back edges of the tail boards. It's still in the view? There's really just almost no track lines. That's pretty. I've got that thing dialed in and humming. All right, so I've laid out my shoulder lines. The next thing to do is, you might think, oh, let's lay out the tails now. I could lay them out now, but I'm actually going to wait to do that. What I'm going to do is lay out the location of my dados and then route the dados. Now, the reason I'm routing the dados now is because the Endgrain there's no gaps in it. And after we cut the tails, there will be gaps. And I know they're not going to be big gaps, but if we had dados on our pin boards, then there would be big gaps, and you'll get better contact and better registration with the technique I'm going to use if there's no gaps here. All right. So I'm not going to lay out the tails yet. I'm not going to cut the dovetails yet because I want a full, no gaps in my Endgrain when I go to do the dados. All right. So what I do need to do though is this is actually the last time I'm going to use the shop drawings that I made available for y'all, which, Joe, they're in that black notebook on top of my planer.
I don't know if I can get it. I'm trying to see it. Hold on.
We need it.
Okay. In the binder?
Yeah, they're in the binder. They're loose, or maybe they're right on top. No, they're just loose in the binder. And my old shop recipe notebook. All right. So if you look at the shop plans, you'll see that the bottom drawer is 2 1/4 inches tall. Then the bottom drawer is 2 1/4. The top drawer is 2 inches, and then the shelf is located 5 1/2 inches above the divider for the top drawer. So we're going to lay out these locations, then go to the router table and route them. All right. All right. So now we need to know. We already picked our inside and our outside. You have to pick your front edge and your back edge, and in a sense, so you're making your top and your bottom. Now, what I'm going to do, because these nicely work out, it looks like that these two boards were actually mating when I resawed. So this is going to be my front edge, and I'm going to draw a little triangle there. So that tells me the orientation of these in the cabinet. The point goes up, the wide base is the bottom, and it tells me that they go like that. All right, and we can do the same with the top and the bottom. Here I would probably be looking at the edge grain, and I am doing that. And on this bottom piece, it kind of sags a little in the middle. And this one kind of raises. Let's see around this way. Yeah, that looks good like that. All right. So actually I'm going to go with these two as my front because the grain's tighter and they more closely mirror one another. So I'm going to go with that. So there's my front edge there. So now I sides, and I can start to lay out the location of things. I normally do this layout on the back edge just because I don't really care. It's less to clean up on the front edge. So I'm going to clamp these in my vise. Oh. Yeah, I'm going to clamp these in my vise. Okay. And there is one reason I forgot about to have a gauge line down here. This is on the back. So that gauge line, which is always hard to do on these edges, that gives me a place to measure from, because this bottom drawer is 2¼ inches tall. That means it's from this shoulder to the bottom of that divider. So I'm going to measure 2¼ Now that divider is 5/16, and the dado we're going to cut for is 1/4 inch. You need to know this 5/16 so we can measure for the next drawer. So this is that's where I'm taking material away. That's where the dado is going to be. Now it's 2 inches.
Sorry, everybody, for the camera keeps focusing.
And then 5/16 for the thickness of the divider, and then 1/4 inch for the dado. Now this is very typical of what I do in terms of dado width versus thickness of parts. The thicker I leave the tongue, the stronger the drawer is. So what I do is cut a dado starting at the bottom of the shelf or the divider, and I usually make it just a 1/16 of an inch less than the thickness of the part. So these are 5/16, so the thickness of the dado is going to be 1/4 inch wide. And that means that the tongue that goes in there and the shelf or divider as a whole is stronger than if I were to say make this 1/8 of an inch and center it. There's just really no reason to do it that way, and this way is stronger. So that's the reason I do it that way. Now it's 5½ inches up from here to the bottom of the shelf. Is this all still visible?
Yeah.
This one is 1/4 inch, the shelf is, with a 3/16 inch dado.
Someone, Michael asked, why not make the dado 5/16 of an inch?
Because then your shelf, well, all right, so if I make it, if I make it 1/4 inch and cut that tongue to fit into it, then the shoulder on the divider or the shelf is going to come up against the side of the cabinet, and that's a cleaner look and easier to get right than making this 5/16 and sliding this in. Then where the dado comes down and touches the top of the shelf or the divider, it has to be perfect, and that's harder to do. So it's very common, I mean this is a normal way to do it, is to make the dado a little bit smaller, undersized, and then have that shoulder come in, and that hides the dado, and it's easier to get that to be right up against the case side than it is to try to get it to fit so perfectly that there's no gap there. Yeah, so that's why we do it that way, or I do it that way. All right, so I have the location of all three laid out, and as I said, these dados are going to be just over 1/8 of an inch deep. I will make a note to myself to put some of this information in the lesson for tonight on Thinkific. But I can tell you that when I'm the shop drawings that I gave you are really normally all that I would have when I go into the shop. I don't need to, you don't need to put down how deep the dado is, It's for a small cabinet like this with case size that are less than 1/8 of an inch thick. Less than a 1/2 inch thick. I make them a little over 1/8 inch, and the reason why is Then I make a tongue 1/8 of an inch. We'll explain that later. But it's a little more than 1/8 of an inch deep. And I just, that's just part of my memory. And so I don't write that kind of stuff down. And so the shop drawings are that's really all I would go into the shop with. I know there are other furniture makers who would have super detailed drawings before they go into the shop, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'd probably do it if I had more patience. But also, to be completely honest, I don't need to write down dimensions for dovetails first, because dovetails get laid out on the piece, and no matter what I draw at the drafting table, the piece itself is probably going to be a little bit different. So I just lay them out when I have the piece ready to go, and just go from there. I will also tell you that this is going to be the last time that I use the shop drawings. Once the case is together and you have the dividers and the shelf in, everything else is made to fit. It doesn't matter how long the shop drawings say the drawer front is, because we're not making a drawer front for that drawing. We're making a drawer front for the case that we're making, and we have to have the drawer front fit into that case. So after tonight, I'm not going to be using the shop drawings anymore. Everything will be made to fit the cabinet. All right? So the next thing we need to do is go to the router table, and that's going to take just a few minutes for us to move into camera and get set up. So why don't you guys take a few minutes to get a drink, go to the bathroom, yell at the neighborhood kids to get off your front lawn, whatever it is you need to do, and we will be back in less than 5 minutes, okay? Cool. Live?
We are.
Okay, so I've got my router table out, and I have a 1/4 inch spiral bit in it. I'm using a down cut spiral bit here that will cut more cleanly. And I have clamped just a solid piece of MDF to the normal fence so that I can push along this without any trouble. And, ooh, not that. There we go. And I'm going to have a block to help me guide these through. So the way this works is, let's just make sure that that is square. That is square. I've got my side pieces, and they're just going to get fed through, and I'll be able to stop them. I'm going to go with 3/16 of an inch at the front. So the dado from the front edge, the dado will be inset 3/16 of an inch, and then it just goes out the back. All right, I have it set for the height. Now I'm going to use my layout lines to set it up for the first dado. Oh, I'm also going to need to plug it in. I just thought about that. It's like, oh, it's not plugged in.
Where does this go?
So, you see the black extension cord hanging with all the other cords over there? Mm-hmm. You can plug it into that and then plug it in over by the door. Yep. All right, so I have the location of the fence set. The only other thing I need to do is to mark where the bit starts to cut and where it stops to cut. And that is so I know where to start and stop my dados. So what I've done is I've turned the bit so that its widest diameter is parallel to the fence. I've brought the workpiece up to it just as a reference. So now I can... I really hope it's not. It's off. I'm just going to bring a rule up here, and I'm going to make a little mark at 3/16. Now I'll come around to the other side and do the same thing again. 3/16. The dados come all the way out the back, but stop when they get to the front. So on one of your pieces, you're going to be able to just push it straight into the bit, and then you're going to stop it when the front edge gets to the mark on the right-hand side of the bit, or on the infeed side of the bit.
Did you say how deep you're going with the?
Just over 1/8 of an inch. So like a 32nd of an inch over 1/8 of an inch. On the other piece, you will need to start on the front edge, and then you can push all the way out the back edge. And what you'll do, when we get there, I'll show you what I'm going to do. So the end grain of the piece goes against the fence. This push block goes up against it, and it's going to keep. And I'm going to. This first one starts. I can cut into the back, and then I have to stop. That's the first one. All right. So can you hit the?
Yep.
So there's the first dado. Whew! I was scared for a moment. All right. I'm just going to do this and then explain. How is it already? It's so late. So for the second one, where I was leading with the front edge, what I did was bring that front edge up to the mark on the outfeed side of the bit, drop it down, and then push it through. All right. For the other two dados I have to cut, the procedure is exactly the same. I'm going to move through those pretty quickly so that we can move on to dovetails, all right? But Joe will be watching for questions, and I will answer them if I can, or when I'm completely done, I'll answer questions, all right?
They asked for us to repeat the questions because they can't hear me asking them this time.
All right, I'll repeat. So I have to move the fence again, or I have to move the fence. This time, the bit, the widest diameter of the bit, because it's a spiral, the cutting edges stick out more, and then there's the flutes as it goes spiraling around. So the cutting spurs or whatever are perpendicular to the blade now, and that shows me, will give me how to locate the width of the dado, so to speak. All right, so that's correct. Now, when I made this router table, when I designed it knowing that I do dados in small cabinets this way, so that I offset the router towards the front so that I have more distance that I can get in between the bit and the fence. When you do this, you also have to redo you need to double check your little marks on the fence, and mine are off. So just by a smidge though. No, they're off by quite a 1/16 of an inch. So I'm just making a different line this time so I don't get them confused. All right, let's do it. So I'm going to do this, and then I'm just going to go right into the last one without turning off anything and just move through as fast as I can. For the one I'm about to cut, yes.
Repeat that.
Yeah, when I'm done. All right, giddy up. You can see the difference between using a spiral down cut, which this is really clean because it's pushing the fibers down as it cuts, versus fiber upcut. An upcut bit, because it pulls the fibers out as it's cutting, so you get these whiskers left. So I don't have a down cut bit. The middle drawer, will you mind getting out that 1-inch wide Lee Nielsen? Oh no, better yet, there's a Japanese chisel all the way at the back, a 3/4 inch wide Japanese chisel. Yep, the paring one. So I've got to cut those whiskers off, and then we're going to lay out the dovetails and then cut the dovetails. All right, so maybe can you go to the overhead view? So I'm just going to come across like this. You get a little bit of resistance this way for the fibers. And that's how you know if your chisel's sharp right there, boys and girls.
We do have some questions.
All right. Oh, so these two dados at the bottom are 1/4 inch, and this one up here is 3/16. There are other questions, Joseph?
One person asked, but it got answered. But why? How do you know you're square to the router? But someone said it's because the bit's a circle.
Right. You don't have. You're right, because the bit is a circle and it's cutting at a point. You don't have to worry about the fence being square to the bit. It's the bit is it's always going to be parallel. It's like the fence is a tangent on a circle. So no matter where you go around that circle, it's always, in a sense, square to it. All right. So yeah, you don't have to worry about that. You can choose to either, overhead. You can square these up or not. It's a personal preference. I do prefer to square them up. So at some point, I will square them up before I glue the case together. All right. So now we have all of our dados cut. If we were good, then when we do this, they align, and yes, they align. And just going back for a second, that question about the router bit and the fence. What's important here, and why I was referencing off the end of the board, and that's because the end of the board was against the fence. I wasn't trying to use a miter gauge or anything like that, and that's because, one, I know that if I reference off the fence, because of the way it's tangent to the circle or the point of the router, that if I reference off the fence, then all of the dados I cut will be parallel to the fence, and so parallel to the top or bottom, the Endgrain of the board, and then my drawer pockets will also be parallel to that, and my shelf will be parallel to that. You won't have anything leaning forward or leaning back. So all of that works together to create a drawer pocket that is what you want. That will be the shape that you want. All right, so it's time to lay out some dovetails. Are there any questions? All right, overhead camera. Now, my dovetails.
It is focusing hard right now.
All right. I like to use on small things like this. I do a 10-degree angle. So I have this board here, this piece of plywood that has the 10-degree bevel on it.
Hold on 1 second. Oh, there you go.
Is it going nuts?
Yeah. Can you push stuff up a little close, keep going, right in there?
Yeah.
Just keep talking.
All right. So this piece of plywood has a 10-degree bevel on it, and I'm just going to use that to set my bevel gauge. Oh, come on. All right, so now my bevel gauge is set to this angle. All right. And I'm going to use this to lay out the tails. Now, because of the way I'm cutting the tails, I only need to lay them out on one end of one board. All right. And I am going to use what I normally do. Can you see this well? Is that in the zone?
Yep.
I do 1/8 of an inch on the outside. And these are really just giving me a visual indicator of what the dovetails will look like. I'm not super concerned if these are exactly the same, because when I go to cut them, they will turn out to be exactly the same. All right, so 1/8 of an inch there. And on the shop drawings, I have a 3/4 inch pin in the middle. So I need to find the middle of this board, or close enough to the middle. It is just over 4.5 inches. So if I come into 2 1/4 from here, and then 1 2 1/4 from here, can they see these two marks?
Yeah, hopefully. You can lift them up if you want.
So I measured 2 1/4 in from each side of the board, and that in that little space between these two marks is the center of the board. All right. I'm not worried about it being perfectly centered right now, because when I cut my dovetails, that pin will end up being, that tail rather, will end up being perfectly centered as a result of the technique we are using. All right. So I'm just going to, I need a 3/4 inch wide. So that's 3/8 on either side. So I'm going to sort of visually center between those two pins. This hand?
Your head.
Oh.
There you go.
So I'm 3/8 and 3/8. And then I also do 1/8 of an inch here.
It is struggling to find focus.
Sorry about that, y'all. It's probably because there's not enough contrast or
Right
something.
there is good. I don't know what you did different, but
Well, I angled it. All right, can you see the layout now? So here's a half.
do you want to turn here? Go ahead.
All right, so here's my initial marks for the layout. I've got half pins on the outside. Then I put a 3/4 inch tail in the middle, and there's a 1/8 of an inch pin in between it and the outside. I have no idea what these outside tails are. It doesn't matter, you know. That width is going to be determined just by the center, tail, and then the pin sockets. All right. I'm going to go lay these out with a bevel gauge to get a visual look at them. All right. Forgot to silence my phone. All right, let's get back to this camera. Somebody's blowing me up. All right, so there you can see the tail layout. And again, because of how I'm about to do this, these are just more like a visual indicator for me to say, okay, I like the size of those things, the proportions of them, and the location of them. When I cut them at the table saw, that's going to make everything perfectly symmetric around the center point. Okay? So the next thing is to move over to the table saw and talk about how I'm going to be doing this. You can do this technique with absolutely any table saw blade, okay? It does not need to be one of the specialty blades from, say, Forest. The only advantage of having one of the specially ground blades is that there's no cleanup to do in the corners of the pin sockets afterwards. If you do it with a normal table saw blade, you're left with a little bit of chiseling to do. All right. I always tape my boards together and cut them at the same time. Now I know that Alexis and Jeannie and Bob and everyone else that's taken in class with me knows that the only way to get tape off a tape roll is to cut it cleanly with a knife. All right. Get those lined up nice and flush. Come up about there. Make sure that, yeah, the layout is on the outside. Any questions while I'm doing this? I'm going to turn that off. And I'm going to do a second piece of tape. Just so it doesn't wiggle on us. All right, so I do happen to have one of the specialty ground blades, and every tooth on it is ground, the top of it is ground to 10 degrees to match the slope of my tails. All right, so that is set up. But you can do this with any dovetail, any table saw blade. Here's that piece of plywood I had before that has the angle on it. I'm going to use this to set the angle of my blade. Now this is sort of like, how do you make a workbench if you don't have a bench? How did I get the angle cut on there if I don't have, if I don't know the angle? Well, to be completely honest, you can make your tails at just about any angle you want to. So you could make that whatever you want, lay them out, and then if you're not using one of these specialty blades, you just lay it, you bevel it to that angle. If you are using one of these specialty blades, what you do is you put a marking gauge line on a board, and then you slowly bevel the blade until it cuts parallel to that marking gauge line. And then you can make a piece like this, and you can use it to set your bevel gauge. You can use it to set the angle of your blade. And we'll use it at the next step when we are cutting our pins. So this little setup block, or setup gauge, if you will, is critical for this type of dovetail technique. The other thing I need is a way to hold the boards as they go, as the blade cuts through them. What I've made is, I guess you call it a sled. It's got two runners on it, which fit into the miter gauge. There's a piece of plywood that they're screwed to. And then there's this fence, which is 5 inches tall. That's, I don't remember what that is. Let's say that's 4 inches. And it has just some gussets on it to help the fence stay at 90 degrees. This extra piece of plywood here is over where the blade will cut so that the blade will always be buried. When I pass through, it won't be exposed. The actual dimensions of all of this are not super critical. What is critical is that this is 90 degrees. This, so that when you put these pieces on here, that the cuts are made at 90 degrees. Because if they're not, then your shoulder is going to be wonky, but also your the angle of your tail is going to be off. It's going to become like a compound miter cut rather than just a 45 or a 10 degree cut. All right. Because I know a lot of you are going to say, hey, will you give us plans for that? Probably not, because I don't want to, but because it's not critical. I can tell you that I made it 20 inches long so that I could do something up to 10 inches wide like this. And this fence is 5 inches tall. And the depth of it is 6 inches. So the bottom piece of plywood is 6 inches wide.
I used a miter.
You can use a miter. You could use 2 miter gauges with something attached to it and push them through. I would use 2, not 1. All right. This, of course, I put all my clamps over there. So I'm going to go get a, I don't think you see them?
Yeah. The little ones?
Yeah, red-handled one. All right, so my layout is down here. Oh, duh. Give me a piece of the cherry on the bandsaw there. Doesn't matter which one. Yeah. So we need to set the height of the blade. The angle of the blade is already set. Take my marking gauge, and I've cut a line onto the bottom of this scrap piece. You can use anything for this. It doesn't have to be even remotely the same size or anything as your work pieces. All right, so I'm going to just make a test cut through here, and I'm going to raise the blade until I'm cutting at the gauge line. All right. Zoom in on that. So you can see I've got the blade height set, so it's cutting right to the gauge line, and it's leaving a clean shoulder in there. You can see that it's also cutting parallel to the gauge line, and that's why up in the corner of the tail, there's not going to be any clean out left to do. If you use like a combination blade for this, you're going to have a little bit of clean out to do in that corner. All right, now we're ready to start cutting some tails. I got a stop block here. This down here on my sled, I can see exactly where the blade's going to cut. So I take my, what do I want to do? We're going this way. So I can do that. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm lining up the pencil line for the outside of the outer tail with my left-hand side of the zero clearance kerf. And I'm going to clamp this stop block in place. I don't know if I have enough clamps over here for this, Joe.
I fancy.
All right, so now that's in place, and I'm going to cut the outside of all my tails now. So it's going to be 4 different cuts with this one stop block setup. You want to, and then I think what I'm going to do is just go ahead and cut all the tails, and you can ask questions when I'm done. But basically, I'll make a cut and do it 4 times, and then move the stop block and make the next cut. And watch what I'm doing as because I'm basically making 2 cuts on each end with the stop block. And because there's 2 ends, that becomes 4 cuts. All right, let's go. All right, so the last cut that we're going to make will define the outside pins, the inside of the outside tails, rather. And your layout lines at this point no longer matter. What you want to do is make sure that you do not cut into this tail at all. So look at the 0 clearance curve. And what I do is put the tip, the little pointy point of the tail, you can either put it just outside the kerf or right on, but not in the kerf. All right, and then clamp your stop block down, because if you nip the little corner, the little pointy corner of the tail, then you're not gonna. There's gonna be a flat there, and it'll be a little gap in your joint. All right. Okay, just zoom in on that. You see that? So that's all the pairing I have to do now to get before I can transfer. That's almost nothing, right? It's not recommending you go out and buy a blade like this, but if you want one, they are freaking amazing. And you don't have to buy it. You can buy a standard combination blade, and if you find someone to sharpen it, I would buy a good combination blade, you know, something that has a fair amount of carbide in the teeth. So, you know, like an Infinity Super General or a Freud Fusion Premier or a Woodworker 2. But something, you know, that end that has a fair amount of meat to its teeth, and then have a local sharpener grind every tooth so that the top of each tooth is at that same angle that you want. For me, it's 10 degrees. It could be 14 degrees, whatever. So you don't have to go the route of buying the specialty blade from Force, because I will not mince words. It was not cheap. And also right now their wait time is crazy, like 5 months. All right, so I'm going to go to the bench. I'm going to clean up that waste, and then I'm going to transfer. Overhead. I'm going to clean up the waste while they're still taped together. Hopefully you can't see my head.
We can. Just your ear.
Just my ear. I have beautiful ears.
Not from the back.
Maybe you can see the big scar behind my right ear. My right ear was almost cut off on the playground when I was in 4th grade. As you know, I may or may not know, I grew up in Florida. Back in the 70s, it was not uncommon for there to still be pirates in Florida. And one day on the playground,
So when I switch to the other wide,
whatever, you're the camera dude.
you gotta switch your angle. I'm bad. They can't see you anyways. Now it's the top of your head. It's great.
All right, so I got into a knife fight with some pirates on the playground in 4th grade. And that's how I ended up cutting my ear. Actually, how I got my ear cut is almost a more unbelievable story. There's this guy in my class named Freddie Cifaldi. I probably shouldn't give his real name, but oh well. Freddie has gone on to a stellar career in criminal enterprises and has been in and out of jail in Jacksonville. But he was 2 years older than everybody else, you know? So we had all these tires stacked up on the playground, these big tractor and airplane tires. And at the end of recess, we were supposed to unstack them so when the little kids came out, they couldn't get hurt on them. And I was standing in the middle of the stack, like in the donut hole. And, you know, we were supposed to go in, so Freddie pushed the top one off while I was still in it. And a loose steel radial caught the back of my ear as the tire went over my head and just just ripped it. Anyways, it's just one of many wonderful stories about trips to the emergency room when I was a kid. All right, so I cleaned up in between. Now we're ready to do a little transfer. This is the most important part of cutting dovetails, what I'm about to do. Yeah, I can talk to you there for a minute. Dovetails look good. That came all the way back to me. Dovetails look good if the pins and the tails fit together nicely. It doesn't matter what angle they're at. It doesn't matter how big they are. It doesn't matter if they're uniform. What matters is, do they fit together nicely? Now, I will put a caveat on that. It doesn't matter how big they are, etc., within reason. All right. But if they fit together well, then they're going to look nice and they're going to be strong. And the way that you get them to fit together well is by doing a good job transferring and then making sure that you understand what your transfer lines mean and what they tell you about where you can cut and where you can remove material and where you cannot. So we're gonna work fast, and I'll explain things as I go. All right. Now, in theory, all I really need to do is transfer one set, and then I could use stop blocks again. But actually, it's a little bit faster if I transfer all of them when it comes around to the cutting. So that's what I'm going to do. I have, let's see, go back to my layout lines. All right. That's how those go. And here's how these go. So this pin board goes up here. This pin board goes down there. I'm going to start with the top. Inside of the top goes to the back of my bench. I have a little square of wood with another piece glued onto it. This was made by my friend Mike Pekovich. And the way it works is put it like this, down into the vise. The Leviathan wakes. Tighten it down, and then turn it over because this is a square. Make sure I got everything lined up right. All right. It holds the tailboard at exactly the right height. Now I'm going to make sure that my front edge is flush. The two front edges are flush. Back edge doesn't matter. I can clean that up if I have to, but you want the front edge to be flush so you don't have to monkey around with it. All right. It is flush here, and so it's square. You want to make sure that your alignment is square so that when you put the case together, the sides come out square. All right. I'm going to take a pencil and mark. Now these are too small for me to get in with the pencil really. Please say there's more lead. All right. So I'm just going to do a little tick. Oh, crap. Do a little tick mark here and here, and then here and here. Now, if you recall, these were cut with a table saw blade whose angle was set with my piece of plywood. So was my bevel gauge. So now I can just mark these lines. And that gives me the location of my tail sockets, which are going to get cut out. Now I do need, because of how I'm cutting these, I need a line on the face of the board to line up with a zero clearance kerf and a sled. So I'm just going to bring these down. Now it's important to, when using a pencil to do this, the entire pencil line is on material that you want to keep. Because when I put the tail on there, all I can do is draw on top of the pen. So all of my pencil line needs to remain. All right, so that's what I meant by you have to understand what your layout lines are telling you about where you can and cannot cut, what material you can remove and what material you can't.
Brad asks, why not use a marking knife? Repeat the question, please.
Yeah, why not use a marking knife? I don't like to use a marking knife because the marking knife cuts into the end grain, and because you want an accurate line, the flat side of it is going to be against the tail, and the bevel is going to be in the end grain. And that means you're cutting a line into the end grain that you want to keep. So you don't cut away your that knife line when you're making the pins. And I think that can be confusing. You have to leave that line. And that means that on the top of your pins, there's going to be a little knife line. Now, is it possible that you're going to clean that all away as you're cleaning up the outside? Sure, but it's not guaranteed. All right, so that's why I use a pencil. The pencil line is going to get easily cleaned away. Also, I can see a pencil line better, so that works for me. All right, now I'm going to do the other end of this board. I have a feeling we're only going to get through dovetails tonight and not actually make any dividers. But the dividers will be really easy to make at the beginning of next episode. Next lesson, rather. Next episode. What's that? I'm a influencer. I'm a doofus. That's for sure. Joe would like to make fun of me tonight, but he can't because when we went fly fishing on Monday.
Nope, not Monday. I was out sick on Monday.
Oh, that's right. It wasn't Monday. It wasn't Monday. That's why it was the day before.
Yeah,
Sunday. I caught the biggest trout of the day, didn't I?
If you say so.
And I caught more.
More for sure.
I definitely caught more. Although your biggest trout might have been roughly the same size as mine.
Yours is better looking.
It was beautiful. It was a beautiful trout you caught there, son. All right, there's another one.
You want to just do that one board?
Yeah, we could just do this one board, one joint. Well, no, I want to bring the whole case together.
Fine.
It really does not take that long. But we just won't have time to fit the dividers. So we'll do that next week.
Do you prefer using mechanical pencil versus sharpened pencil?
Is that one? I'm being asked if I prefer mechanical versus old-timey pencil. For this, I think I prefer a mechanical pencil because the space in between the tails is so slight, so small. This is the bottom now. Yeah, so there's my, all right. That it's hard to get in there even with a really sharp old school pencil. So for this, I normally use a mechanical pencil, but I also use I use the old school pencil a lot as well for other types of layout and marking and things in the shop. Just as, you know, you need more than one type of hand plane, you need more than one type of pencil. Or maybe it's just that I don't have any more woodworking tools to buy, so now I'm buying all different types of pencils. And fly rods, to be fair, yeah. People are probably tired of looking at my hands. No questions, huh? Everyone's asleep? That's not nice.
some music for the quiet parts next time.
What'd you sing for us, Joseph?
Dude.
Sing us the song of your people.
How would you cut such narrow pins with hand tools?
Well, I would define the cheeks with a back saw. I would cut out the waist with a coping saw, and then I would pare to the shoulder with a chisel.
And then another question, why didn't you hand plane the edges before you cut the dovetails? Also repeat.
Yeah, also, so the previous question was about what tools to use for hand cut dovetails. This question is about why didn't I hand plane the edges? Because there's such a little amount to be removed that all it takes is 1 or 2 passes to clean that up, and so that's not a big deal. Also, the edges are more likely to get damaged during construction than the inside is. So if these get dented or nicked or anything at this point, it's easier to repair them than if I've already cleaned them up, because in a sense I've got waste to work with. So I haven't done that yet. So like if I already get a dent, I would put water on it and swell the grain back out. And if I've already hand planed it, then I can still do that, but now I have to hand plane it, and really clean it up again, and that takes more of the material away. All right, let me transfer these lines down, then we hop back on the table saw. And it will not take long. And if I'm on my game tonight, these joints will fit straight from the table saw. But I will tell you, even if they do fit straight from the table saw, it's not because of the blade and the technique, but rather because of the layout and understanding what my layout means and working to the layout, so to speak, And I did this too when I first started. I always was kind of like, well, if I just get that jig or that tool, then my work's going to be good. Things are going to get better. And that's just, there is no silver bullet in woodworking. It's all a matter of working, doing it again, doing it again, doing it again, until through repetition, you genuinely understand, for example, how the dovetail joint works and what the layout means, and are able to work to that. And I could take someone who's cut far fewer dovetails than me, give them the same technique to do, and their dovetails would not come out as well. And it's because of experience, but also, and that experience gives me an understanding of how this all goes together. That really sounded jerky, but what I'm really trying to say is it's not the tools, all right? And I feel bad if someone rushes out to buy this blade and it's just not a cure-all.
Only if you're the tool.
Yes, you are the tool. By the way, because Joe's also from Florida, the song of his people is Cheeseburger in Paradise by Jimmy Buffett.
It is not.
But I'm from Jacksonville, and the drummer from Leonard Skinner lived around the corner from my neighborhood. It's a good story, right? All right, I've got to switch over to a Dadoes set now. We need to have shop minions in here to do this kind of stuff.
Can't do it all.
No. Oh, and I think I Why didn't I remember to take the break and the...
Where's that stuff?
It's all... Oh, I did, thankfully. It's all right there. Any questions that I could answer while I'm doing this? No?
Tell the cameraman to pull his weight.
Pull your weight, Joe. Okay.
We answered all your questions last week.
So I'm going to go with a 1/4 inch stack because the smallest socket is pretty narrow. If I have my smallest socket were like 1 inch wide, I would probably go with 3/8 of an inch to a 1/2 inch. The reason I'm going to a dado stack is because it takes less time to clean out the waste. You could use like a 24 tooth whip blade with a flat top grind. That would be totally fine. It's just going to take more passes to get rid of the waste. Actually, this is a technique, a slightly modified version of a technique I learned years ago from Greg Paolini. All right, put this away. We need to make sure that the blade is at 90 degrees, which I didn't do. Isn't it just adorbs? Oh, man. Monkey butts. It's at 90 degrees. Yeah. All right.
Matt, how much time do you think you saved using the table saw versus hand cutting the dovetails?
I gotta tell you this, we would not have all these 4 joints together in this class tonight. I know that for a fact. It's a considerable amount of time. I mean, you have to think that I'm doing all of this while I'm talking tonight. So this is slowing me down. I could probably do the case dovetails on this in no more than an hour, I would think. Okay. Going back to my setup thing, and I'm going to angle the miter gauge to match. And the way I do that is I place it up against the miter gauge and then just angle it until that bevel end is flat on the blade, which it is now. All right, so now the pins are going to have the exact right slope to them to match the slope of the tails. And again, it's because of this one little setup block. All my setup is being done from this as a reference, all right? So it's all going to come out the same. Now, I have another, I don't know if you call this a sled or not. It's just a 5-inch tall piece of 3/4 inch ply with a 1/2 inch piece of MDF glued to the bottom. And I am going to screw this to my miter gauge. What time is it? 8:45. Now we can do one side of each pin this way, and then we have to switch it and angle it the other way to do the other side of each pin. So I'm going, in the interest of time, I'm going to work through that without stopping. Well, the first thing I'm going to do is set the height of the blade. And then once I have the height of the blade set, I'll have a 0 clearance, and I will go off my layout lines and cut away all the waste material. And then hopefully it'll all fit together nice and neat. This creates a lot of dust, so I'm going to wear my my respirator.
I won't. I'll just die.
Joe's gonna die. All right, tonight. All right.
Is that it?
Yep. All right. Let's do a little bit of fitting here if there needs to be any. All right, that's the top. That's the outside. All right, so, okay. Does anybody have any questions about what I just did?
Yeah, a couple people. I can see how this step causes confusion, cutting the wrong side. How does Matt keep this straight?
How do I not? Woo! All I needed was the meat hammer to get it together. That's a good fitting joint there. So, I don't know here. If you noticed initially what I was doing was comparing my test cut to my layout. And then once I figured out, I knew that this side was cutting the right-hand side of the pocket, not the right-hand side of the pin, but the right-hand side of the pocket. So I put right there. I don't know, if you wanted to put left for left-hand side of the pin, that's fine. You just have to keep track. And then the other one cut the left-hand side of the pocket. That's why I write left there. And now that anytime I go back, it's already, I already know what I know what to do. All right. So that's how I keep track of it. But initially, I was looking at the test cut that I made and comparing it to my layout and making sure that I oriented the pieces on there correctly at first. How's that? Was that a good answer? All right. What am I'm doing the other side of the top, right? Yes. Ooh, 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 ooh. That's a little tight, but it'll work. It'll go. So I'm putting this together. I am going to dazzle and amaze. All right. We can go a little bit over 2 hours. I don't think anybody's going to be upset.
David said good answer.
What?
The answer that you gave about keeping track.
Oh, okay. Good. Well, we should just stop now because it's 9 o'clock. Cliffhanger. All right. Now we're doing the bottom. And so it's going to be this one. It's a little snuggle-rug over here. Ooh, yeah, you can also tell because I'm totally yanking those up. This is really where this technique saves you time because there's just so little pairing to do. And pairing is what slows you down. How's it getting? It's this pin right there. Is that their pin? And it's this here side. It's this here side of that here pin. Got all the
You always pair off the pins.
Yes. Yes. Never. I mean, it depends. If you cut the tails first, then you never touch the tails afterwards. If you cut pins first, like some weirdos do, then you never touch the pins first.
Chris asked, how do you know where to clean up the tails or pins to make them fit better?
Usually you can see a bit of pencil line inside the socket on the tail board. I can also tell where it's resisting going down. You know, like, oh, it's not fitting, it's not going down over here, so I know I got to pair off a little bit over there. You can also look inside, and I kind of messed that up, but it's all right. It's all good. It's all good, man. It's all good, man. All right, that'll come together, I hope, without splitting anything. But also, it's a little bit of, I'm trusting my layout lines. And so if I see material on the outside of the pencil line, I know that it's in the socket and needs to come away. You get a little bit of compression with a hardwood like cherry, not much. So it's possible to fit it together a little tight, but it can't be too much because what you'll do is end up splitting the pin board. Sorry, is my head in the shot again? I just fit that one. I'm doing the bottom. Oh, nobody saw that gap. There's a little gap there. Huh? Nope, it was from cutting. I did a bad thing, children. That's probably a little too loose. All right.
You're on the main camera.
All right, you're at main camera now? All right. You need a little love. Shouldn't be hitting that. That cherry is denting. That's probably a little tight. Oh, monkey butts. What happened there? All right, I'm going to fix this real quick. Definitely don't hit the inside. It did, but It's more the cut is not straight up and down. And that the board might have moved on me when I was making that cut. This is really stupid what I'm doing right here. Because it's going against the grain too, which is really a good way for that to get messed up. And for you to end up with a chisel in your hand. So that actually did split the pen a little bit, but not so bad. It'll be all right. Shit. I'm not on the soft side stuff. Yeah, I just spilled a glass of water on my bench.
Cool, we got it all in.
Yeah. And on the inside. So I taught a class this weekend, and one of the things that one of the students commented on was how little how I never got stressed out about anything. And that's because, I mean, even though I just spilt water everywhere and now there's water all over my piece, I mean, who cares? It's not the end of the world, right? I mean, really, it'll raise the grain a little bit, and I'll gently sand it down. It'll be fine. All right. And now it'll swell the grain and make my dovetails look really nice. So they all turned out really well. I don't really. All right, here we go. Zoom in right here. Can you see that?
I think so.
There's a gap. All right. Now it's not like the gap between David Letterman's teeth, but it's still a gap. And you know what? You know how I would fix that? I wouldn't. Just leave it. No, I mean, it's so unnoticeable. It's not even worth. You will probably make matters worse by trying to fix it than just leaving it. So I'm just going to leave it.
I could soak that side of the board.
I don't think it's going to swell that much. It's about a 32nd of an inch, maybe a little bit less than that.
What's that in metric?
In metric, it's 3 kebabs. 3 kebabs. So all those joints turned out pretty well. Before we go, one thing about your dividers and your shelf. If you remember, we cut them all the same length as the top and the bottom. So, and we just cut our dovetails up to the gauge line. So if I take my marking gauge and mark the top face of my dividers and my shelf, it shows me exactly where the shoulder needs to be in order for me to get a really tight joint on the inside. So the first thing that we will do next week is put these in. All right. I'm sorry we didn't get that far tonight. It's kind of hard to gauge exactly how long things are going to take at this point because we've never done this before.
Are you going to take it apart, leave it together, wrap it up?
At this stage, I would square up my dados because that's what I prefer, and then glue it together at this stage. My shelves and divider stock, I will wrap back up again until I can fit them and glue them in. All right? So the question was, am I going to glue up my case? Am I going to take it apart and wrap it up? What am I going to do? Yeah, tonight, I mean, normally I would square up the dados and glue the case together before I stopped working. I'm not going to do that tonight. I'm going to, but I'll probably leave it together until tomorrow morning and come out and glue it up and leave it then. So Are there any other questions?
Is there a rabbit for the back piece?
There is a rabbit for the back piece, and we'll talk about that next week too. So if you get to this stage, don't glue up. Don't glue up yet until we can do the rabbit. Okay, I knew that we had to do the rabbit, but I kept letting it fall out of my Rolodex. And so next week when we start, we will talk about the rabbit. We will fit the shelf and the dividers, and then we will talk about making the drawers. All right.
Michael wants to know, what are the pro/cons to squaring the ends of the blind dados?
I square them up because what I do is I'll take like a combo square and set it to 3/16, and then I'll mark that front edge for all of the dados and then square it to that layout line. Then when I push my shelf in, I know that it's the tongue on either side is going to have a positive registration to stop it. If you leave it rounded, those dados are not going to align on either side. It's impossible that you were able to do that. And so when you push it in, one side might want to push in further than the other, and it will crank out a square, and then it'll throw your cabinet out. And if you're not careful and you glue it in that way, you've kind of screwed things up. So I like to make sure that they all terminate in the same distance from the front. And the way to do that is now to square them up.
Alexis had the best comment. She said Letterman didn't fix his gap either.
Yeah, so that's right, Alexis. Letterman did not fix his gap ever. So the mistakes you make are just milestones of your progress in the craft, and they're nothing to be ashamed of. And I'll leave that gap. No one will ever see it. No one will ever comment on it. So I'm not worried about it at all. And it doesn't mean, I don't know if you have this idea that, and I'm not even a good furniture maker. Great furniture makers like Garrett Hack and Chris Bexford and people like that, nobody's perfect. Nobody's perfect. We all make mistakes, and if it's a really bad mistake, what differentiates the great ones from people like you and me is that they know how to fix the mistakes better. But everyone makes mistakes. I've never made a perfect piece, and I probably never will. Although my kids are pretty close. Any other questions?
That's it for now.
That's it for now?
Jeannie said, should we cut the shoulders before gluing in? But we're going to do that next week, right?
Yeah, don't worry about the dividers yet. Okay, don't glue those or don't mess with those yet until I show you the process for doing them. All right?
All right.
Anybody else?
Wabi sabi.
We're all good? All right. Thanks for tuning in. Next week will be lesson 3. And if you have any questions in the meantime, post them to the website. And the replay will be up tomorrow at some point. We have to do just a tiny bit of editing to it before we can pop it up, and that just takes Joseph a little bit of time. All right? All right, cool. Thanks for tuning in. Have a good weekend. See you next week.